Hello and welcome to the Contrarians, where we're right and you're wrong. I'm Alex.
I'm Julio, and thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Help promote the algorithm and spread the word.
You can also find us on SoundCloud to subscribe and review. And don't forget to visit our main website, wearethecontrarians.com.
Follow us on Twitter at Contrarian Prime, and to like us on Facebook, visit facebook.com/Contrarian Prime.
And if you have the willpower to keep up with our pretentious ramblings, you can follow us individually at Contrarian Alex for myself and at Ovnio for Julio. That's OVNIO.
Now, time for the podcast. And we are recording for Contrarians Corner for Signs, Part 2 in our Shyamalanthology.
Hello, and welcome back to the Contrarians, where we're right and you're wrong. My name is Alex, joined as always by my partner in crime, Julio, my Meryl, in this case, to my Graham.
The hoak to your Mel.
Yes. As we are here for part 2 of the Shyamalanthology, as M. Night Shyamalan is certainly bringing something special to the table. What I think is widely regarded as his best film. I mean, obviously, The Sixth Sense, as we've talked about, was a game changer, and literally everyone has been trying to make a Sixth Sense moment again since that movie came out.
Shyamalan himself has been trying to do that.
Yes. Hilariously, other people have done it much better than him. He's failed almost every time he's tried to do that again. But yeah, Signs, the 2002 Mel Gibson joint, or excuse me, it's an M. Night Shyamalan joint, but a Mel Gibson vehicle, starring the still wet behind the ears and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Joaquin Phoenix. He was still a few years away from winning that Oscar for Walk the Line. Not to be... Not to be left in the shadows, though, we have Miss Abigail Breslin, who I have no idea how even old she would have been here. You want to guess? Maybe 4?
She talks like a 2-year-old. And we know that she was really talented later on. So
she's just such a great actress.
Really precautious.
Yeah. Looks like she would have been 5 or 6 when they filmed this movie. And then, of course, just the most recent export from the Culkin compound in Rory Culkin he was a literal decade away from his career-defining role in Scream 4. But that's all in the future, and we're going back to the past for this. Julio, would you agree with that statement? This is probably his most celebrated film, M. Night Shyamalan?
If we are discounting The Sixth Sense, then I think that this is the one that is like the consensus, right? Like most people would agree with Signs. It's like, because you have people that I count myself among them, people that will say that Unbreakable is his best, but that movie has as many detractors as it has fans.
I'm one of them.
Yes. I was trying not to get into it, but yes, you're wrong, Alex, but that's all right. That's a Shyamalanthology for a different time. That's volume 2. But with Signs, I think that most people would, I don't think anybody hates it. Very few people actually hate it. It's more like, oh, if I don't like it, I can at least respect that you like it. Whereas, other movies like The Village, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people that like The Village, but if you like The Village, you're instantly considered like an idiot. If you like Signs and somebody doesn't like Signs, I don't think that they look down on you. They're just like, all right, well, I guess aliens are your thing.
Yeah, what I was going to throw in there is I would say this maybe even probably stood the test of time a little bit better than The Sixth Sense. It feels like I talked to a lot of people that are still really on the Signs bandwagon versus just Sixth Sense. Oh, it was great when I was a kid, that type of thing. Whatever the case, part 2 of our Shyamalanthology, coming off the heels of our personally successful performance with the live stream for The Cure, and obviously the gentlemen there outdid themselves, and because of the money donated during our did we do a half hour or an hour? I can't even remember.
We did an hour that felt like 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah, we get it a whole hour, but we just ramble on that it flies right by. So part 2 here, if you hadn't checked out our last episode and want to go back and do so, we covered The Last Airbender. We started at the bottom, working our way, of course, climaxing with The Sixth Sense.
horrible choice of words.
Come on. So that's what that word actually means, but then the adult film industry had to come and take it. If this is your first time joining us here on The Contrarians, we greatly do appreciate it. If you're a returning listener, you know we love y'all. Give us a minute here while we explain what we do to the newbies, the newcomers. Do people say newbies anymore? I don't know. To our new listeners.
Millennials do, but we're past that.
Here on The Contrarians, we like to rage against the Rotten Tomatoes machine. We find a movie on Rotten Tomatoes that is highly rated, one of those shiny red tomatoes, those patented logos known as certified fresh a lot of the time, and we will make a case for maybe why that movie is a bit overrated, a bit overstated, and kind of some of the negative aspects that critics missed or just chose to ignore. We typically shoot for about 85% and above to make the Shyamalanthology work. We're going a little bit different here. We're bending our rules a little bit. As Signs is only 74% on Rotten Tomatoes, still a very good reception, critical reception. So in the first portion of this podcast, Contrarians Corner, we will be bringing Signs down a peg. Bringing it down to earth, if you will.
Do you feel, because I think that like a couple of other movies that we've done in the past, that this was much higher in the tomato meter at some point?
I just assumed, yeah.
So we could say that we're just looking back at its history as a fresh movie, and then slowly, much like M. Night Shyamalan, it started falling from grace.
And then we also will find a movie on Rotten Tomatoes that is lowly rated, one of those nasty green splotches known as rotten, for example, our previous episode, The Last Airbender, and we will make a case for that film's positive merit. And believe you me, it was quite a chore doing that with The Last Airbender and some of the other movies we've done in our time here. But that comprises the first portion of the podcast here, Contrarians Corner, where we strive to prove that that art is not only subjective, but you can be over the moon or you can be cynical about anything you choose to be. Julio, we eventually do get to how we really feel about these films, though, and that comes in the second half.
That's right. The second half of the show, aptly titled Real Talk, that's where we tell you how we really feel. We tell you, the audience, and we tell each other. Sometimes we know already. Now, with M. Night Shyamalan, Alex, our conversations have mostly centered around Unbreakable, just because we're in such polar opposites when it comes to that movie. So I don't think we've ever actually talked about Signs in detail, not even The Sixth Sense, which is why these episodes, this Shyamalanthology is kind of interesting beyond their gimmick, because I just want to know how you feel about them. And of course, now in our past, we have a pretty heavy discussion about The Happening. Thanks to the live stream. So yes, in this case, when we get to Real Talk, guys, I don't know how Alex feels about Signs. I honestly, not having seen it since it opened, I kind of rediscovered and had to reassess how I felt about the movie myself. So lots of good stuff in store once we get the second half of the show. Before that, we're gonna try to be funny.
The operative word there is try. We'll see how that goes.
Much like M. Night Shyamalan in this movie.
Yeah, it was. I did not see this when it came out. We'll get to some of the things I remember as it goes along. My thought is I would have watched it the first time in college, but then watching it back for the podcast tonight, the way some of the scenes were laid out, it made me realize that I had never seen it all in one sitting. It was one of those movies that I caught on TV here and there, and I knew the plot, I knew what happened, but yeah, this was my first time watching it cover to cover, so it should provide some interesting discussion. Now, being that this is 74% on Rotten Tomatoes, again, we're going to treat this as though it were the shiniest red tomato and the freshest of the bunch. But like we said, the legacy of this movie is a positive one, and I think a lot of people still hold it in pretty high regard. So some of those people probably took the time to submit their reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and what were they saying, Julio?
Well, got a few fresh quotes from the Rotten Tomatoes website. I'm going to start with Mark Duchzik from Mark Reviews Movies, who says, signals the transformation of a promising young filmmaker into a brilliant young filmmaker. So it only took 3 movies for Mark to just go, he's done it. We've reached peak Shyamalan-ness. You
son of a bitch, I'm in.
Give me whatever comes next. I'm in. Mark Stein from The Spectator says, Shyamalan may not be Hitchcock, but so far he's made the best 1950s B movie of the 21st century.
My God.
And I say, no, sir, that's The Happening. That was in his future.
Is that review dated? Because I was going to say, if it was at the time of release, it's like, buddy, it's been like 18 months.
2002.
Yeah, so he wrote that right at the time of release. So it had been, literally less than 30 months at that point, or right at 30 months.
And just bold opinions from a bold man named Mark Stein. I wonder how he feels about it now.
I got to do my math right, or otherwise it's going to bother me. It was 32 months, excuse me. Still, you can't fucking crawl at that point. The 21st century could not speak full sentences yet.
I mean, I would feel uncomfortable calling anything the best or the worst anything of the 21st century now. And it's been 21 years.
We got a long ass time to go. Jeez.
And now let's close with Peter Canavies from Groucho Reviews, who says, an anti-Independence Day, a cousin of Close Encounters, but most of all, a well-modulated, dread-laden, faith-based mystery.
I have some heavy contention and resentment towards that anti-Independence Day comment.
Yeah, I mean, you're not selling it to me that way.
No.
As soon as you said anti-Independence Day, I'm like, all right, done. What else is playing? Also, when you call it a faith-based mystery, I mean, I don't know if that meant something different in 2002, but definitely in 2021.
God.
Yeah.
That would scare me away, like the just colossal eye roll. It is sad because I don't mean to usually condemn anyone for their religious beliefs. And what I mean by usually is just extremists are a different thing, but that is my entire life. Christian comic books, Christian music, Christian movies, faith-based anything. It's just immediate. Nope. Change the channel. We're doing something else. So yeah, if you pitch this movie like that, people are going to be like, see ya. Fortunately, that's not what the majority of the marketing was, because this movie ended up making $400 million.
All the marketing had to say is from the director of The Sixth Sense.
Yes, and at that point in time, that was at the point in time we're going to for the movie, that was good. That wasn't... That packed the houses. That didn't make people go, nope. So we are going back in time to the weekend of August 2nd, 2002, as Signs, directed and written by M. Night Shyamalan, was released. Released by Touchstone Pictures, I believe. That's who the signature at the beginning of the film is. And then, of course, I had to do my due diligence, because the Touchstone signature was like a big part of my childhood. And then I wondered what happened to them. As with everything else, I knew they eventually just were defunct, but as with everything else in this world, with over the next 100 years, it will either be purchased by Disney or Amazon. And Touchstone was purchased by Disney, slowly faded out, slowly faded away until the point where they just disbanded them. It says in 2018, which sounds remarkably recent for that to have happened, but it just sounds like they released like 2 or 3 movies a year for 10 years. So coming off the heels of Unbreakable, correct?
Yes, this is his third one. I mean, Unbreakable did well. This is not even, I mean, this was just a continuation of the meteoric rise of M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, I said coming off the heels of, which I believe I've used that expression already about 3 times, but making things full circle. M. Night Shyamalan had a bit of a dabbling in the early and mid 90s with some of just work that he had, and then wrote She's All That and Stuart Little, which were also released in 1999, the same year as a little movie called The Sixth Sense, which, as we mentioned just a few moments ago and have mentioned on this podcast before, a truly revolutionary film. Next year followed it up with Unbreakable, which I think some people, I know I did at the time, I was also 13. I thought it was like a sequel to Sixth Sense, but that's just because Bruce Willis was in it and because all the marketing material was from the guy who brought you The Sixth Sense.
I mean, technically, you don't know that it's not. Unbreakable could be just the afterlife.
My God, blown my mind. And Unbreakable also received positive reviews. It stands at 70% on Rotten Tomatoes, but I remember definitely being an outlier as a teenager, not enjoying it, and especially in my adult life. And but that brings us to 2002 with Signs, where it's fitting that I don't know if this was by design, but one of the reviews you picked out mentioned, him becoming this prolific director, and one of them compared him to Hitchcock. But I remember you calling out on our Happening episode that after Signs, it was felt like he was going to be the next Spielberg, like the next guy. And this kind of solidified that with the 3-movie streak that he went on. Unfortunately, the 4-movie streak he went on after this would all but drown that fleeting thought.
Yeah, he didn't. He ran too fast because Spielberg also hit a slump at some point in his career. But by then, he had generated so much goodwill that he was able to push through until he hit Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. But Shyamalan only had like a handful of movies before he got bad. So the people turned on him a lot faster.
His runway there was no way that plane was going to sustain takeoff. It was just too short of a runway. All right. So Julio, going into this, you said you had seen this in the theater. I had pieced this together from numerous TV viewings in college. For the purposes of the podcast this evening, I watched this on Amazon Prime. Where did you fire up signs?
Amazon Prime as well. It's there for free. Why not?
It is. Very good transfer. Very enjoyable. I had forgotten the opening credits, just how intense and dramatic the music is. They open the same
as it gets.
Yeah. It opens with written, directed, and produced by M. Night Shyamalan, and then when the closing credits begin, it's an M. Night Shyamalan film. So you know who's in charge here. You know who's riding the ship.
And in case you didn't know what he looked like, don't worry. By the time the movie's over, you'll know.
With a budget of $72 million, as I mentioned before, made just a hair under $410 million, and was fairly well received. Julio, Mel Gibson, the star. This is something that we don't really see anymore today. Was this the last Mel Gibson vehicle?
I mean, that worked. You know, I've seen some later Gibson vehicles. Like he has what's it called? Edge of Darkness. I think that's something that came out. I want to say maybe 10 years ago. And
well, I mean, he has the Beaver, and I just mean in the sense of
a
like
blockbuster.
A blockbuster mainstream film.
I mean, we're still waiting for the Patriot 2, but yeah, I think that we're done with Gibson as a
leading man.
But I mean, he's a leading man in smaller projects. What do you call this? You know, like he's no longer. If he was ever on the same league as Will Smith and
that's
Tom
true.
Cruise,
like a
he's no
superstar.
longer. Yeah, he's no longer.
He's not one of the guys anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has a lot to do with just his personal history. He kind of torpedoed his own persona.
I would say it mostly has to do with that because it's certainly not from lack of talent. Yeah, the next year, 2 years after this was The Passion of the Christ. That was, I remember as like about to graduate high school student thinking that was the next, like he was going to be the next Spielberg, starting with The Passion of the Christ. And what was that movie he made a few years later? Was it Apocalypto?
Apocalypto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
he took it from Shyamalan. That's what you're saying.
We're here to bid farewell to Mel Gibson as one of the superstars in Hollywood.
It's almost like he knows it too.
As he plays the character of Father Graham Hess, a former pastor, preacher, priest. He is there with his on an isolated farm with his daughter Bo, played by Abigail Breslin, his son who has asthma, Morgan, again played by Rory Culkin number 5, and his younger brother. But honest to God, just based on how boyish Joaquin is in this, he could have just been his older son, Merrill. As Wikipedia says, a failed minor league baseball player.
Nailed it.
So Mel Gibson is a single parent. We find out very quickly that his wife is deceased. She had died in a single car accident 6 months prior. She was on a walk and unfortunately got hit by a car. We go right in. That's something about this movie that is a bit disorienting because especially with the table that had been set by M. Night Shyamalan up until this point, it's a slow burn. You take some time. And this, it's just right into the thick of it. The signs start to appear. There's crop circles that have been made and, weird shit's happening. These dogs are going crazy. And we have the benefit of time now, but, trying to watch this and put my mind in the place of where things would have been at this time, it just goes too fast. It moves too fast. And that's things start to fall off the tracks, and it's proven with the history. This was kind of the beginning of the downfall for M. Night Shyamalan, as what's proven is when he rushes things, that's when shit falls completely apart. He took his time with The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, and I think that's why those are, were his crowning achievements.
Yeah, I felt like M. Night Shyamalan figured it out ahead of us, that he really wasn't as talented as everybody else was saying. We didn't notice. It took us a few more movies. But I think that by the time that he was done with Unbreakable, he was like, well, what the fuck do I do next? I'm all out of ideas. And people are expecting so much. And so he just kind of threw together this half-baked story about aliens. And you can tell as the movie unfolds that he is no longer... It's not that he's making it up as he goes along, but almost, right? That's what you're saying. Like, he just rushed into it. There's no build-up. There's no foreplay. He's like, hey, you saw the crop circles in the poster? I'm just going to give you the crop circles. I constantly felt like he was running out of room. Like, he was running and then he hit a wall and he's like, what do I do next? And then he would like take a left and then keep running. Like the movie just lurches. The plot of the movie lurches forward and then stops. And then there's just like a lot of close-ups of Mel Gibson's face. And then everybody talks really slowly. And then suddenly, something weird starts happening again. The movie runs forward a little further and then it stops again. It's just weird. It's the command of storytelling that we came to expect from him after his first two movies is no longer there. It feels like it's shaking, but we were under the spell. Like, anybody that watched this movie when it came out, he had built up enough goodwill to lead you to believe that he knew what he was doing. And, in my case, you would realize at the very end of the movie that, oh, no, he didn't really know anything. He knew as little as the rest of us. Yeah,
but he knew to really piss me off in this movie with I didn't think to check doesthedogdie.com because fucking Rory Culkin kills a dog in the first 10 minutes of this movie. I guess what's going on in the air and everything is making these dogs go crazy. So the dog tries to attack Abigail Breslin and he stabs it with a fork. My notes just have no with about 10 O's as, man, that always sucks.
Well, and he does it again later in the movie. It's just, It's such a cheap emotional button. We were talking about that. I think it was on one of the Patreon segments that, about just cheap buttons that filmmakers can push. And killing an animal, torturing an animal, that's an easy way to get an audience reaction. It's way beneath good filmmakers. But here, Shyamalan just goes for the cheap trick twice in the movie. And you could have done something a lot more interesting. I mean, that's cool that the aliens are sort of the presence of the aliens is driving animals crazy even before humans have noticed. But surely you could go somewhere more interesting from there instead of just having them kill the dog.
Absolutely. We get a reoccurring character who's a police deputy, and we find out eventually she was the one on site and the one that delivered the news to Mel Gibson, to Graham, that his wife was going to die. Mel Gibson is called to report the vandalism to his crops. He calls it in. She's on scene, and she calls him father. This is the first example we have of him saying, "Stop calling me father." So,
did you think she was his daughter?
Father. No, I didn't think that.
That would have been quite a twist really early in the movie.
Mel Gibson had a kid and he was like 14.
Yeah. That kid spent their entire life trying to just make him proud. She went to police academy and everything. He still won't recognize her.
I'm not your father. Get away from me. She explains that there's been, some local hooligans have been causing a ruckus, so that she just surmises that's what it is. Later that night, we get the line from the trailer that I remember so near and dear. Abigail Breslin wakes up Mel Gibson and she says, "There's a monster outside of my room. Can I have a glass of water?" Just like that. Like, there's no break in the sentence. It's just like one long run-on sentence. Do you remember that from the trailer?
No, I remember it from watching the movie earlier. Because it's so bad. I kind of have the relief of knowing that Abigail Breslin survived this movie. Like, that dialogue didn't just kill her career, but it could have. Thankfully, she went on and became Little Miss Sunshine. But that is terrible, and you don't do that to a kid.
Fucking Chris Klein in Election reading his cue cards.
Yeah,
she has some weird thing about water. She has constantly just riddled around the house or glasses of water because she always finds something wrong with them. I wonder if that'll come back into play later in the movie. Not entirely sure. That same night, though, I believe it's that same night where Meryl and Graham hear a disturbance outside and they decide to team up and go out there and chase off whoever's out there. And it's played like for laughs, like a comedy sequence, like they're running out and Joaquin's saying, "I'm going to beat your ass." And Mel Gibson's doing the straight man thing of like, "Oh, I'm getting really angry." And it's one of those scenes where it's good actors acting like they can't act.
Yes. It's Mel Gibson trying to play the Steve Carell character from Anchorman. Like, loud noises. I don't get it. How did you feel about the comedy? There was so much comedy in this movie. That's the one thing that I didn't remember, and it doesn't work. That's the worst part. If I wish that the case had been that I had forgotten how funny Science was, but no, I'd forgotten how hard Science tries to be funny and fails.
Mm-hmm.
Joaquin can kind of get it. The problem is Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson is not a funny guy. He can be funny. Like I've seen funny movies that feature Mel Gibson in one way or another, but he is he's intense. He's an intense kind of performer. And here Shyamalan asks him to, I mean, he put him in a checkmate, basically. He told him, okay, I need you to be almost emotionless because you're mourning the recent loss of your wife. So you have to be almost dead inside. But I also need you to be really silly and say really stupid shit. So that the movie's kind of lighthearted at times. It's just, I mean, Gibson can't pull it off, and I don't know how many people could. You know, Joaquin, he has a completely different kind of energy, so he's a little more on his element when all the weird tonal shifts happen. But in the end, what that causes is that Mel Gibson looks even worse anytime that his character and Joaquin's have scenes together, which is a lot.
Yeah, and as we've discussed before, Joaquin, I mean, we've discussed his lowlights with Joker, but you know, The Master and some of the other things he did, Inherent Vice, he is capable of being funny in certain aspects. But exactly to your point, that's not Mel Gibson's calling. So some of this is just kind of cringe, turn away from the TV type thing, which shouldn't be, because you got a clash of the titans here in terms of two monolithic actors on stage with Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix. But M. Night couldn't help himself. He just had to get his licks in, had to get his laughs in. He said to himself, "This is how I'm going to win over the audience, not the aliens, the laughs."
They'll think it's about the aliens, but it's really about me going back to my Stuart Little roots.
And then Abigail Breslin comes in and says, you know, everything's on the same channel on TV, and this is where we learn aliens are here, baby. Which it's funny because the design, the crop damage that was done on Mel Gibson's farm, like the insignia, the design that was carved into his crops look exactly like what is in India. But in India, they are like, holy shit, aliens are here. And then in rural America, they're like, oh, those drunk brothers down the road did this perfect work in your crops, and, you know, just got some hedge trimmers, and they just did a hell of a job with the tapestry here. So it just goes to show you, you know, America's the last place to take anything seriously.
Yeah, and that poor cop doesn't even get a chance to redeem herself because they basically write her out of the movie now. I mean, we'll see her in flashbacks, but that's it. The last thing she does before she exits the movie is, I guess, take it upon herself to give Mel Gibson some psychological advice. She's like, hey, you need to get out more. Take your kids out for a walk. Never mind that aliens might be invading our planet. Go get them some ice cream.
So Graham takes her up on that and takes the kids to town. They go to the bookstore. Why does Joaquin Phoenix go to the recruitment office for the military?
That matter. Never comes back. It's just so it's so we can learn about his backstory, about why he is a failed baseball player. Really, he just went on that little side quest so that the audience can get some exposition.
Well, that's where you're wrong, because he actually went on that side quest so we could get a fucking cameo from Michael Showalter.
That was Michael Showalter?
Coop. He was, yeah. You didn't notice that? He's like got his fucking Johnny Ramone haircut and his leather jacket on.
I thought that maybe he was an actor that I should have recognized, but I definitely didn't.
He was just there though, because to demonstrate the dumbass bully from youth that has no other prospects in life, so he just had to join the military. So he's there, and to make fun of Joaquin, and exactly what we learned is that he was at one time a not prominent, but a prolific minor league baseball player that had a record for like the longest home run, 2 of them or some shit. But we also learn he has the record for the most strikeouts, as Michael Showalter reprises the role of Doug from The State there with the exact delivery and cadence. Julio, I know you probably haven't seen The State, but he just has this character named Doug, who's just kind of this badass and just, I'm Doug. And his catchphrase is, and I'm out of here. And that's all I was waiting for him to deliver. And but he gets fucking punked by Joaquin Phoenix, who falses him, flexes like he's going to hit him, and it scares him.
Do you think that Shyamalan included Showalter because by this point in production, he realized that Mel Gibson was not giving him the comedy that he needed, that he had put in the script? He's like, I need something stronger to signify that this is all supposed to be funny. Get me the guy from The State.
It's possible. Or he was like trying to... At this point in the movie, the more artsy folk in the audience weren't ready to laugh until they saw Michael Showalter. They're like, oh, yes, Doug is here. I can laugh at this now. The most important thing we get from this, in addition to the exposition, is the line that Joaquin says where the recruitment officer asks him, do you really have the most strikeouts? And he says, it felt wrong not to swing. Wonder if this is going to come back.
Yes. Do you think that'll come back, Alex? That's the tagline of the movie.
So we get a Mel Gibson going to the pharmacy, the pharmacy aide there, the lady that works behind the counter basically has to go to confession with him, even though he keeps stating, I'm not a priest. And she's just like, well, it could be the end of the world. At the local bookstore, we get the truthers that say there's really nothing going on. These movies, we talked about Contagion, I think on one recently on a Patreon exclusive. This is not as fun after having lived through COVID, the characters like this in movies, because it's really one of those things you have to think about. If tomorrow our world was invaded by aliens and there was
all you had to do was wear a mask.
Well, no, even I'm just saying all those crop circles, even if there's video footage on the news of aliens coming down to Earth and fucking vaporizing people, there will still be people that will say that's not real. They will see aliens vaporize people in front of them and say, you got a better chance of getting hit by a bus going down the street, like that type of thing. And
yeah, they'd be like, I can't wait until after the elections when the aliens mysteriously disappear.
Perfect. Yes. Yeah, but like I said, it's not quite as fun as it would have been before the pandemic that I guess technically we're still living in. No, technically about it. We are still living in it. And there's still people that don't take it seriously, and 20 years from now, we'll say that it was never a real thing to begin with.
We're still in the basement.
Yes. We're trying to find the coal chute to get the fuck out of there.
But this is, yes, it's definitely not funny now, but I would argue it was never funny because Mel Gibson just can't sell the comedy. I mean, this is a really good example, actually, because this is a scene that it's not even that, we're talking about something serious and there's a little bit of quirky comedy. This whole thing at the pharmacy is just straight up a comedic scene. It's just meant to be, you could put it in a Judd Apatow movie, and it's like, minus the language, Apatow would throw in a few fucks in there, but and it would go on for much longer. But still, it's comedy. It's comedy, and Mel Gibson is playing it straight. Like he's not even trying to be funny. He's just looking at her and downplaying it. And she is a Meredith Weaver. I've seen her. She's kind of like maybe not back then, but now she's a recognizable character actress. I've seen her be funny, and she's doing what she can right now, but Gibson has given her nothing. So that scene is just dead in the water.
We see the family having lunch. They having pizza. They had a local pizza place. And an ominous presence wanders into frame. A mysterious man wanders by. M. Night arrives, and we get these longing, very dramatic shots on his face, and very, I used the word ominous already, but brooding is the word I was looking for. Shots of him, and then Abigail Breslin says, who is he? And we as a nation, as a world, at that point, we're still asking ourselves the same question. Who is this guy? That absolutely had to be one of the commercial breaks when this made its way to network television.
uh, this is crazy, though. This is just maybe I'm wrong, Alex. Maybe it's not that he knew ahead of time that he was not as good as everybody said. Maybe Science is where he actually started to believe that he was as good as everybody said. He's like, you're right, I'm great, and I can act too. Because I don't remember him in the Sixth Sense. I'm sure he's in the Sixth Sense somewhere. And then in Unbreakable, he has like a tiny part. I think he like kind of runs into Bruce Willis in a bathroom. But this is a speaking part. Like later on in the movie, he gets like a full scene with Mel Gibson. And what's going on? Like, why would you do that? Why would you? Like, he's not an actor. And as a director, he's not a great actor. You know what I mean? Like, why would you put yourself there? And I don't know. I mean, obviously, yeah, you watched it way after the fact, so I can't really. I know when I watched A Science for the first time, I knew what he looked like. So when he showed up, I'm like, what the fuck? That's him. Why is he in his movie? That's, I think that if you're a director that nobody knows, like if Terrence Malick showed up in one of his movies, like I wouldn't know. That's an actual Easter egg. But M. Night Shyamalan, by the time The Science came out, like he made that decision knowing that the audience would recognize him, which to me speaks of a very, I don't know, I don't want to say disturbing. That's a little too serious, but kind of like a distorted point of view as far as, I don't know, what you bring to your movies,
Yeah.
And ultimately it's just distracting. If for some reason you manage to get through the forced comedy and you're somehow engrossed in the tale of science, the moment that the director shows up in a really like slow motion, ominous, like you said, cameo that turns out to not even be a cameo but like a full part later on, that's just, the spell is broken. You're like, oh, that's the guy. He's supposed to be behind the camera. What's going on? Yeah, it's really weird.
Again, Julio, I mentioned the pacing of this movie a bit earlier, and it's just a perpetual motion machine, just really sped up. It just, once it gets going, the acceleration rate is a bit much. So within this one scene, following what we just mentioned with M. Night, Joaquin Phoenix goes from completely being dismissive of what's going on and saying it's just computer nerds doing it, to immediately believing it, to immediately becoming obsessed with it over the course of like maybe 2.5 minutes. And to his credit, Graham and Mel Gibson's performance in this scene is very good, because he's just clearly does not know what to believe. He doesn't think it's a hoax, but he also doesn't think it's completely genuine. And, due to his constant battle with faith, as we'll get to here before too long, he's a man without an island, so to speak, a mental island. He doesn't know kind of where to reside. And I really, really like that aspect of his character, and particularly in this scene, but that's overshadowed by the incredible just identity crisis or schizophrenia even that Joaquin Phoenix displays here. Do you know what I'm referring to? He's like talking shit about the whole idea of it and then immediately starts believing it.
Yeah, I was trying to remember, what is it? What's the movie's justification? Is it just that they start hearing the sounds from the
baby monitor goes off?
Baby monitor.
And then,
that's all
and
it
then
took.
he's like, yeah. And then over the course of the next 20 minutes, he's staying up all night watching all the news coverage and learning everything about it. And yeah, it's oddly paced. We went through we went through all 5 stages of grief with him in the process of fucking 30 seconds.
How do you feel about that baby monitor sequence? Because it goes on forever.
It does. That's basically my feeling on it. It goes on a long time.
Right? Every time you think it's over, they're like, oh no, now they're climbing on top of the car. What's happening?
Yeah. Mel Gibson's like, no, Bo, I don't want you climbing on the car. And then he just gives up. That's like a genuine moment, though, as someone who's seen people interact with their kids. When they don't listen, it's just like, all right, fuck it. You're not going to listen to me. Do what you want to do. If you fall down, it's not my fault. So from here, Julio, Joaquin isn't the only one starting to believe, because an alien invasion is imminent. These ships are starting to maneuver their way down, or at least we think they are. They have stealth camouflage in the sky, but these signals and these patterns of lights are starting to appear all across the world. We get, the tension is just palpable at this point. Graham wanders out. God, and this is the frustrating part of white people, man. Like, he knows this shit's going on, and we can tell as the audience, he's buying into this. He's believing it. So naturally, he just wanders out into a cornfield in the middle of the night with a flashlight that's like faulty and not working. I've always thought how awesome it would be to basically be self-sustaining, have a farm. And I love corn. You can't really get good corn in Texas, but in the Northeast and the Midwest, you can get really good corn. So having a farm up there would be awesome. But just the idea of going into a cornfield in the dead of night terrifies me. So Mel Gibson doing this while he knows a potential extraterrestrial invasion is going on. What an idiot. And rightfully so. He trips and drops his flashlight. By the time he recovers, he sees fucking the alien equivalent of Angelina Jolie's leg in that one dress at the Oscars a few years ago.
And then he comes back and tries to downplay it. Like,
yeah, it's all good. Corn, the harvest is going to be good this season.
Yeah, I found it frustrating, and I mean, I guess you can read it either way, because I didn't read it like he believed this. I read it as kind of like what you said earlier. He doesn't know what to believe, and to me, that is such a fundamental flaw to put on your protagonist. I need somebody, if he's going to lead this movie as he's supposed to, then I need him to kind of give a shit. He needs to give a shit. And the problem is that Mel Gibson doesn't really give a shit for most of this movie. Because like I said, he's just dead inside. So he just underreacts to everything. I would have loved it if he was just the supporting character in Joaquin Phoenix's movie. And we were just we were following Joaquin Phoenix's roller coaster of emotions as he goes from not believing to believing, and just kind of seeing his family fall apart, and then hopefully Shyamalan, or a better writer, would have been able to really give us more of a journey, in his transition. But instead we're stuck with the guy that's just kind of, he looks the same, he speaks the same almost in every moment of the movie. So it's just very underwhelming. I wanted him to get freaked out, and of course it was just so frustrating. He has this really close encounter with an alien, and he doesn't even run back home. Like, he walks in the door, and he goes and he sits on the stairs, and he starts talking to Culkin number 5 about his book, and instead of just barricading the door looking for the gun, I don't know, it's not what I wanted.
He says, we're going to turn on the TV and figure out what's going on. So they turn on the TV, start watching the news coverage. The most recent Culkin remarks about how, they're going to have to change science books, and that's immediately what they say when they turn on the news, what the broadcaster says. And so while they're watching the TV, the kids naturally fall asleep, and then we get this unreal and just an unbelievably nihilistic monologue from Mel Gibson, because Joaquin's basically asking, well, what's going to happen now? And Graham tells him, we're going to fall into two groups.
Yeah, this is Gibson's Oscar clip, right? I mean, do you agree with that?
Yes. There's one other one I would potentially argue, but they would probably side with this one due to the lighting, how only half of his face is lit.
Yeah. Funnily enough, it's also Joaquin Phoenix's Oscar clip, I think. so they would just play them side by side. No, because Gibson would be for lead actor and Joaquin would be supporting. But it's just weird. So basically, so I'm conflicted about this, much the way that Gibson is conflicted about life, the universe, and everything, because I appreciate that it's a good performance. I appreciate that in a way it took the movie 45 minutes, but it finally gave me something to care about, and it gave Mel Gibson something to do. Right? Finally, he wakes up and he gives Joaquin Phoenix this just devastating talk about how, when something weird happens, some people take it as a sign, a miracle, and kind of a proof that there is a great design and somebody's watching over us. And then there are people that they're like, no, that was just a coincidence. That was just like a freak occurrence. It doesn't mean anything. And he asks Joaquin Phoenix what he believes, and Joaquin goes, and this is why it's his Oscar clip, because Joaquin tells the story of how he was making out with a girl at a party, and he was about to make out with her, and he realized he had gum in his mouth, so he turned around to put the gum away, and when he came back, the girl was throwing up, and he's like, if I hadn't had gum in my mouth, I would have made out with her, and she would have thrown up while we were making out. Therefore, I believe in God. Things happen for a reason.
Seamless logic.
Yes, that's the other tagline of this movie. Things happen for a reason. And so he smiles and he's like, "Thank you, Mel. You always make me feel good. You've comforted me." And then he makes a mistake of asking Mel Gibson, "Well, what do you believe? Do you believe in science and miracles, or do you believe in? Nothing. And then Mel Gibson just opens up his heart and reveals that he doesn't believe in anything. He's like, nope, if there is a God, then he let my wife die. So no, I don't think that anybody's watching over us. I think that we're fucked. If this is an alien invasion, it's not like anything means anything. What's going to happen is going to happen. And so to hear that from a priest, I imagine is even more brutal than just hearing it from your older brother, as if that wasn't brutal enough. But
he just like looks deep into his soul and says, "We're alone."
Yeah. It's not just in space that no one can hear you scream. On planet Earth,
it's everywhere.
Yeah. So it's good. I like it as a piece of acting. I think isolated from the movie, I appreciate it. But once you're done with that, like, all right, please tell me that we're not gonna go back to the same bullshit that we're going through before this really intense moment between the two brothers, right? Like, this is a moment where the movie puts his feet on the ground and was like, we're done with all the silliness. From now on, it's just because, Mel Gibson has shown his cards and now we know what's going on in his head. But instead, no, we just it goes back to being the movie that it was before.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost even worse than if that scene wasn't there at all, because it's there, it teases us with a better movie and then it walks away.
This is also where the flashbacks begin for Mel Gibson, and for us, the audience, I should say. The flashbacks begin for us as we're just getting insight to Mel Gibson's dreams. At this point, we know his wife has passed away from an accident, and so this is where we begin kind of seeing how that all unfolded. And it's little by little, as Noel Gallagher would say. But as I mentioned, Joaquin's completely down the rabbit hole, just obsessed with this, watching news coverage, for as long as he's able to stay awake. The kids are becoming paranoid. They're wearing tinfoil hats. It's all breaking down. Mel Gibson, we see, receives a call, and there's no one on the other line. So we don't know in the moment what he's doing, but he's going to confront who that call came from. We see him just walk up to a house that appears to be like desolate and abandoned. But then we see a car sitting in the driveway, and we find out it's him.
He couldn't stay away. He had to come back to have an Oscar clip of his own. Would you say this is an M. Night Shyamalan Oscar clip?
Yes.
I think he gives himself enough to maybe bamboozle the Academy into giving him an acting nomination. Because he's doing that thing where he's kind of recounting the past without looking at Mel Gibson's eyes. He's just kind of like staring off into the distance, kind of dreamy, but he's saying some fucked up shit, and then he turns and gets real, and then he delivers
a masterclass.
Yeah, it's Shyamalan saying like, look, if I don't direct any more movies after this, I can still act. So this is my reel, just for you.
You will use this for my in memoriam clip.
Just him saying, I laughed, and I this is one of those times where I don't know if Shyamalan meant for me to laugh or if it was unintentional, but his last line before he just
peels away.
Yeah, it's like, by the way, Father, I have an alien in my kitchen. Bye.
This is where we learn why he's so ominous. He's the one that killed Graham's wife. He fell asleep at the wheel and hit her as she was out for a walk. And he just explained, I took this away from you, but I also took your faith away from you. And, it's something I have to live with every day. And Mel Gibson is trying to hold himself together in this sequence. That's what's so fantastical about this movie. Like you're able to identify with certain aspects of him in this moment of you're face to face with the guy who, inadvertently killed your wife and it's taken so much away from you. And on top of that, there's this looming alien invasion that could potentially eradicate the human species and existence as we know it. So you got me with the first part, but then I have no idea what he's going through otherwise.
And then also, isn't Shyamalan bleeding? There's one shot of blood, and I couldn't place it. I think I was writing a note, and I looked up, and there was blood.
There's just so much chaos going on here. But yeah, he's clearly traumatized also, because Mel Gibson's like, "Did you see something? Tell me, son. What happened? Speak to father." And then, like you said, he's just like, "By the way, there's one in my pantry. Don't go in there." And he peels off. And of course, Mel Gibson can't help himself. It's human nature. We're all moths at the end of the day, and we're gonna fly to the light. So the first thing he does is go in there and walk up to the pantry, and he's like, "Hello." Just day one white people shit. "Hello, I'm with the police. And then eventually, if you've ever seen this movie, you know it's one of the more iconic shots. The hand comes under the doorway and he slices off 2 of its fingers. What I did not remember was that this scene is back to back, because obviously this is one of the more memorable scenes. And then it's right into what is arguably the most memorable scene of the movie. Definitely the most memed scene of the movie. And that is Joaquin Phoenix watching that news telecast that has the footage from Brazil, where we see an alien for the first time. Joaquin's, 6 inches away from the TV, like you and I would have been as little kids playing Nintendo. Did you ever the NES game with Jason? He jumps out and then you do the Joaquin where you jump back and hand over your mouth.
Yep.
Yeah. M. Night was making sure to completely fuck people who went for a bathroom break in the middle of this movie. They miss the 2 most iconic parts of the movie.
It is. What bothered me, the movie actually points this out, but it doesn't do anything about it. We're like, an hour into the movie, maybe a little longer. And by now, the kind of like the improbabilities that come with this really weird alien invasion have started adding up to where it's just really hard to ignore them. So just the idea that an alien that can't open M. Night Shyamalan's kitchen door is actually would actually pose a threat is it's pretty silly. That seems like something that he might have kept from when the script was like 100% a comedy. And now, they mention it, because they at some point they start barricading their house, and Joaquin is like, well, what's that gonna, is that gonna be any good against him? And Mel Gibson says like, well, they have trouble with pantry doors. Okay, well, then they're not really a threat. Lock your doors. That's all you need to do. So yeah, it's just frustrating to have a scene that's as effective as Joaquin Phoenix's reaction to what he sees on the TV, while at the same time having it surrounded by so much silliness.
Yeah, and you had mentioned the line that Mel Gibson has about they have problems with pantry doors, and then M. Night builds in his own commercial break fade to black. Like, it just fades to black. It's really the only time in the movie where it does this. It's just basically a reset shot. It fades to black and then it comes back. It's like, all right, back on track. As we're preparing for the attack, it's imminent at this point, and we get what I was going to contend would be Mel Gibson's Oscar scene in this. It's the final meal. It's actually kind of haunting, because Mel Gibson says, he basically tells the family, pick out whatever you want for dinner and we'll make it. And it's, in a way, he's literally coming to terms with the fact that this might be the last meal that they have. So he wants to have a cheeseburger with extra bacon. Joaquin wants chicken teriyaki. The little girl wants spaghetti. And I believe Culkin number 5 wants
French toast.
There you go. So they make everything. There's these ridiculous Toby Hooper type shots of like all the kitchen utensils slightly askew, where I think M. Night was just looking for B-roll. And I was like, all right, here we go. So they go to have dinner. Culkin, everyone's like crying already before anything happens. And then the boy asks to pray. Mel Gibson is very insistent that there will be no prayer, that he's not wasting another moment of his life on praying. And so everyone starts crying and then says, fine, no one's going to eat, I will. So he just puts together a plate like me at a buffet, just a bunch of food that doesn't match up. And then while he's doing this, though, his voice is cracking. He starts breaking down. He starts crying. I mean, I understand he now has his morals and standards and guidance or whatever, but if he was going to go through the trouble of making these 4 distinctly different meals, he could at least humor the kids into praying, considering they might be dead in the next 6 hours. So, I don't know. He kind of deserved to be told that I hate you by his son here.
Yep.
But then again, in the classic nature of a child, he immediately recants that and goes up and hugs his dad 2 minutes later.
Yeah, it's so gross too. Like, as a filmmaker, you have the power of deciding what you show us and how much you show us and how you stage something. And I am of the opinion that you should never show us people eating and crying at the same time. That's just gross. I don't need to see it.
Throwing my boy Abdulatif Kashishi under the table with that one.
The exception that proves the rule.
Fair enough. Yeah, they don't even have time to really enjoy the food, which, and again, all those meals sound awesome. Like, that's something that I would absolutely chow down on, all of that, because then they got to finish boarding up the walls, boarding up the doors, windows, etc. The banging begins. 2 dogs, and the second dog gets killed.
Yep.
Fortunately, we don't really see any of the aftermath. We just sadly hear it. My note, just an homage to Poltergeist. They're here. You think this is going to be, a classic example of the real terror coming from what you don't see, because we just hear the clanging and banging from the aliens. And then, of course, in the end, we just get like a lingering shot of one just standing there like an idiot. But for this like moment in time, it's actually pretty spooky. They're banging on the doors. They're trying to get in. So they go down to their fallout shelter that they have there. Fucking dumbass Joaquin finds like a pickaxe and immediately breaks the light that's down there. So they're in total darkness. And it's so like, the little kid who trips and spills shit on his dad's documents. He's just like, I found it. And then just completely breaks this light. So they're shrouded in darkness until they're able to find a flashlight. We've talked about the pacing so far, Julio. So the aliens are there. They get down to the basement and then it just drags. Like you wouldn't think a scene where they're hiding behind a door and the door is getting banged on by extraterrestrial life would drag and get boring, but it does.
Well, I think that this is where, not that it wasn't obvious before, but it's almost like Shyamalan goes overboard in trying to point out the fact that he is not going to show you the aliens. You know what I mean? Like, he goes out of his way to move the camera away from them now. Like, before, it was just that they happen to be right on the border of what we can see. But here, like, there's a moment where Culkin number 5 is attacked by an alien, and we see the arm, and then Joaquin and Mel Gibson run to save him, and one of them drops their flashlight, and the camera stays on the flashlight just to make sure that it's framed on something that has absolutely nothing to do with the action. It's just, we just hear what's happening while we're like just staring at the flashlight. That is, you can feel the hand of the director there, which is not what you want when you're watching a movie, especially when you're like in this really important scene that has such heightened emotions and all that stuff. You want to see what's happening. This is not like, oh, I'm not going to show you the alien because I want to build suspense. This is just, I'm not going to show you the alien because I don't want to. It's almost mean. It's like, I'm going to show you the flashlight instead because fuck you, I'm the director. So I think that doesn't help. By now we've seen that trick before. He's been doing that through the entire movie. So by now we're ready for something else. We're ready for the aliens to show up. And then it doesn't help that, once again, the breadcrumbs about this alien invasion have started adding up to just nonsense. Because Culkin number 5 has a book that he's been reading that's kind of what Shyamalan is using to give us some sort of a mythology about what's happening, right? We're assuming that what the book's saying is somewhat accurate. And what it's saying is that the aliens are, the way that they're invading, they're not going to use high-tech weapons. They're not going to do anything fancy because they don't want to accidentally trigger a nuclear war that would ruin the planet, and therefore the planet would be useless to them. So their approach is instead to engage in hand-to-hand combat.
Yes.
So they're going, the plan from these aliens is to go house by house and just take on each of, like, every single person on planet Earth. They're gonna just take on them one-on-one. Like, they're just really going like door by door and just terrorizing them, I guess eventually killing them. And they're pretty shitty at it because M. Night Shyamalan escaped. So they don't feel like a threat. They just feel like this thing that's in the background that, if M. Night Shyamalan actually pointed the camera at them and let Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix have a go at them, the movie would be over. But instead, it just drags. I think that's why the movie drags, because by now we figure out that they're not really that big of a deal.
Yeah, in Independence Day, like in the first 45 minutes of the movie, they blew up the goddamn White House. Like, we knew there was danger afoot with these people. And in here, yeah, their plan is just to like Kimbo slice it, just get in an Escalade and drive house to house, and then the driveway just throw down with whoever's in there. So one of them does get a hold of the Culkin, and they fight him off, but it leads to Culkin having an asthma attack. And he doesn't have his inhaler. And so Mel Gibson's like just kind of trying to talk him through it and helping him through this asthma attack and asking whoever the higher being is not to take another one from me. And this is where we get more of the flashback. It's like little by little throughout it, like I mentioned earlier. And so we're seeing more and more. And he finds out here that his wife is dead, and this will be the last time that he speaks to her because she was hit by a car, it drove her into a tree, and she ostensibly, as graphic as it may seem, was severed pretty much from the waist down, and there was really no way to save her. She just had a few minutes left, but you can go talk to her.
Yeah, this is where it ends with him saying, "Is this the last time I'm going to talk to my wife?" And I think fades to black to another commercial break.
And they wake up the next day. It's so great, too, because Mel Gibson's like, how long have we been asleep? And Joaquin says, I think 12 hours. What the how could you possibly sleep 90 minutes in a situation like that? They passed out for like, God, that is like the type of sleeping when I was in college and would smoke like an entire bowl by myself and then wake up the next day and not know where I was type thing. Not in any situation of distress. I can't even sleep for 6 hours a night before WrestleMania, let alone when an alien invasion is imminent would I be able to sleep for 12 hours. But the important thing is they slept through the crises and we won, baby. Earth is back. These aliens have retreated. They say on the radio broadcast, they don't know what it is, but it's thought that a primal defense mechanism drove them away. So we go back up to the living room. We think it's all good. We're going to get the Culkin's medicine. And there's that one remaining vagrant in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, that emerges and is going to take one human life if it kills him. And he is holding Rory Culkin basically hostage. And this is where he realizes it's the one with two fingers cut off. So Mel Gibson, Graham, realizes it's the one that he had encountered previously. We don't know if the alien remembers him or if this is an act of vindication, but I want to say like it's a tense scene, but it's just like that Office episode where Dwight, Andy, and Michael are like standing off with imaginary guns. It's Joaquin, Bo, the alien, and Graham. They're just standing there for what seems like an eternity, not knowing what to do.
They want to give Mel Gibson time to remember the death of his wife once again.
That must be it, because we get and now the dramatic conclusion to what happened to Mel Gibson's wife as he talks to his wife and says goodbye, and what comes of it is this just discussion of, let the kids play and be sure to tell Meryl to swing away. And that's what he tells him, is Meryl's standing right next to his history-making bat on the wall. So I guess Mel Gibson interprets this as the act of a higher being or clairvoyance or what have you. But anyway, yeah, like Joaquin just goes absolutely off on this alien who seems to have no real defense. He does blow like a fog of some sort in Rory Culkin's face before Joaquin goes at him, but he just gets tuned up by Joaquin in this baseball bat. And then all these little glasses of water that have been sprinkled throughout the house continue to fall on him and just burn him and incinerate him alive, basically, is what happens.
Yeah. And then, so at some point the news had said that the aliens, their main defense mechanism was shooting poison, which is what he was doing to Culkin number 5, but because the kid had an asthma attack, then his lungs were closed up. Whatever happened, he didn't absorb the poison, so he was saved. So the whole thing is just Shyamalan kind of like trying to tie it all together to show you again that, hey, things happen for a reason, right? I mean, I don't know. You might disagree, but I didn't feel like it held up. Like backtracking it, right? So Mel Gibson says, "Oh, that's why he has asthma." He has asthma because that way he was able to survive the alien attack, Culkin number 5. And so asthma happened for a reason. And then I guess, Joaquin is not a successful baseball player because, if he was, then he wouldn't be in that specific moment, like at home with his bat, like retired, like on the wall, available for him to like knock out the alien. So Joaquin is a failure that needs to prove himself for a reason. And then the alien is allergic to water, and Abigail Breslin has unfinished glasses of water all over the house. That's her thing. And of course, that's what causes the alien to die eventually. And so she's quirky about water for a reason. Okay, well, I mean, so far so good. But then you get into the real business, which is the death of his wife. And during M. Night Shyamalan's Oscar clip, he says that, he had never fallen asleep on the road before. This is the only time that it happened. And that the roads were deserted the entire drive. And he's like, if I'd fallen asleep for like the 10 or 15 seconds I fell asleep, 5 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later, nothing would have happened. Like, I would have been the one that died. He would have just driven off the road. But because he happened to fall asleep right as Mel Gibson's wife was crossing the street, he killed her. But because he killed her, she was able to, I don't know, see into the future and be able to issue this warning to Mel Gibson to let him, in a very cryptic way, let him know, hey, in the future, our son is going to be held hostage by an alien. And when that happens, what you need to do is tell your brother to use his bat to beat the shit out of the alien, and it's going to be okay. And that's where I have a problem. I mean, that's because everything else you can just go like, well, it happened for a reason. But surely, especially if you're attributing all this to God, right? Surely there was a nicer way of setting this up. Like, did he really need to kill Mel Gibson's wife to deliver that message? Killing Mel Gibson's wife means that M. Night Shyamalan is, fucked for life, because now he has to live with that. And then it means that Mel Gibson renounces his faith for, 6 months, however long, it happened until the end of this movie. Like, I would be mad if I was Mel Gibson. I would be even angrier. I would go from no longer believing that God exists to believing that God exists and he is evil. Because there's no real, in all the other scenarios, I think that you could kind of argue that, well, that was the only way that you could get there, or you got there, without really harming anybody in the process. But in the case of his wife dying, that is such an extreme way of getting, of connecting those two dots that it just doesn't feel right. And yet that causes him to become a priest again. Like, the final shot of the movie is him like getting dressed up and ready to go. It's with his little collar, his white collar. It didn't work for me. I think that's where the movie completely falls apart.
I mean, you held in there for a pretty long duration, so I mean, that should be commended that you made it that far. But you think like Joaquin's supposed to be, have one of the most deadly swings in the history of minor league baseball, and it takes him like 7 or 8 good whacks to get this alien down. And they don't even seem to be like the Independence Day aliens. They just seem to be like skinny, tall people. And it takes him a while. And for, a being that water can destroy, you would think a wooden, a Louisville Slugger could do the trick. And Joaquin's just like, eh.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Why would she say that instead of, why wouldn't she just say, like, throw water at it? Instead of, because that would be a lot more, you know what I mean? Like, if you're dying.
In order to save the day, Mel, you'll have to answer me these questions 3.
Yeah. I mean, what was going through her mind? Like, as she was dying, she saw this flash of Joaquin Phoenix beating the alien with his bat. And it's just like, all right, well, I got to convey this message as quickly as possible because I'm dying. Swing away.
It's like that thing of Alex Jones claims he predicted the coronavirus because a few years ago he said that the Chinese were going to introduce a chemical weapon that would tank the U.S. economy. It's just like that. Yeah, if you say enough insane shit for a long enough period, something from it will eventually make sense.
That's true. And if you look at any sort of a timeline of events, you can come up with connections between them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a very disappointing sort of fairy tale approach to reality that M. Night Shyamalan lands on at the end of his movie. Because honestly, as many problems as I had with Mel Gibson as a character, as a protagonist, he was more interesting when he didn't believe in anything. When he gave that speech about how, like, nobody's watching over us, we're alone. And then at the end, to see him kind of all, like, smiling and pep on his walk, his back, and just ready to give a sermon, it was pretty deflating.
And so the water takes him out, and they're able to revive Rory Culkin. They think because his lungs were closed, he wasn't able to inhale any of the poison, and he's fine. He doesn't really have any recollection of what happened, but he asked, did someone save me? And Graham affirms, yes, I think someone did. And then the closing shot of the movie is we see that he's a father once more, and he's back to the priesthood, and he's dressed to the nines in his, I was going to say priest costume, but I don't think that's what they prefer the verbiage to be.
Does he look at the camera as he's walking away, or is it just something that I felt?
Yeah, that's something you would have felt, because he buttons his collar, his cufflinks, and just kind of wanders off, and then we fade, and we get that blue steel color of an M. Night Shyamalan film. So yeah, there was a reason for Mel Gibson's wife dying, and it was all planned out so that Joaquin Phoenix and the water would save us from aliens.
That's what you got to tell yourself to cope with the loss of your wife. Go for it. But don't try to get me to buy that bullshit.
All right, Julio, I think we're about ready to move this on to Real Talk.
Let's go to Real Talk.
Shit, I know you. You're Merrill Hess. I was there the day you hit that 507-footer over the left field wall. Set the record. Man, that thing had a motor on it. It's still the record, right?
Got the bat at home, on the wall.
You've got 2 minor league home run records, don't you? Why aren't you in the pros making stacks of cash and getting your toes licked by beautiful women?
Because he has another record most people don't know about. He has the minor league strikeout record.
Hello, Lionel.
Merrill's a Class A screw-up. He would just swing that bat as hard as he could every time. Didn't matter what the coaches said. Didn't matter who was on base. He would just whip that bat through the air as hard as he could. Looked like a lumberjack chopping down a tree. Merrill here has more strikeouts than any 2 players.
You really got the strikeout record?
Felt wrong not to swing.
And we are back. But before we get into Real Talk, it's time for PP, our patron pitch. This is where we tell patrons what they can expect on our patron feed, and we also let non-patrons know what they're missing out on. This time around, Alex, I forgot to mention it when we started the Shyamalanthology, but in addition to all the other extra stuff that you get as a patron, you also get kind of a behind-the-scenes look at how it all began, because you've probably forgotten by now, but before we went into our record-breaking Livestream for the Cure segment, record-breaking by Contrarian standards, we kind of had a conversation about how we were going to tackle The Happening, and we talked about it more than we usually do when we do a regular episode. Most episodes, we just kind of find out what the other one wanted to do as we are recording. But in this case, due to the nature of how we were handling The Happening, we needed to have a pre-recording powwow, a pre-live stream powwow, and we recorded it. And so if you're a patron, that should be on your feed already. It probably wasn't on your feed by the time the last Airbender dropped. I think an interesting behind the scenes of Contrarians machine. But also, I mean, of course, if you're a patron, you're getting a lot of other deleted clips, things that didn't make it into the final episodes, and you get to see our pre-recording notes, and then of course you get access to Contrarians After Hours. That's the post show, the side show, the spin-off show where we tell you about things that we're watching or things that we're playing or things that we're read or things that we're thinking about. Sometimes they're related to the main episode, sometimes they're not. So tell me, Alex, what are you bringing to Contrarians After Hours this time?
It's something I'm ashamed that I didn't bring to the table the last time we recorded because it's about 2 weeks old. We're going to talk about the Halloween Kills trailer, baby.
Oh, all right. You're going to have to tell me, do I need to watch the trailer before you tell me about it, or should I just let you kind of paint the picture for me?
You haven't watched it yet?
No, you know me. I don't go seeking trailers. I let them happen to me whenever they happen.
We might actually do like a watch along before we record. It's 2 minutes long, but being that you just went through, I want you to watch it because being that we just went through the Halloween arc that we did, I want you to see how many of like the homages and things that you get in it.
Okay. Am I going to react like Joaquin when the alien shows up? I'm going to cover my mouth.
Just back away from your chair. It's going to happen, yeah.
Just dragging my microphone with me.
What about yourself?
So I've been really busy. I just started a new job, and that's been kind of keeping me busier than usual, which means I haven't been able to watch as many things as usual, which is why for After Hours this time, as it's happened a couple times before, I'm bringing a movie that I didn't like, but that I would like to talk to you about, which is Spree. If you have a Hulu subscription, a Hulu account, that's where I watch it. And you might have seen it show up in your landing at some point. I'll tell you the story of how I arrived to Spree and why I kept watching it even after I was pretty much done. It's kind of a comedy / thriller / slasher. It stars one of the guys from Stranger Things, Steve. I don't know if you remember Steve from Stranger Things, but he's the popular guy that then becomes not so popular as the seasons go on.
Is he
And,
built from all the archetypes of an 80s character? Is that what happens in Stranger Things?
Yes.
Is there any like bit of originality to it?
That narrows it down for sure. The original part is that the actor went on to star in a shitty movie that you can watch on Hulu. Because
God
that didn't
bless.
happen in the 80s. But yeah, he plays an Uber driver that also happens to have dreams of being a social media influencer, and in the process
That
of
is
trying to
the
get
most like 2020 shit ever.
Yep. I know I have your attention already, so I'm not gonna say anything else until we get to After Hours. And then I'll just give you a little bit of lip service to In the Heights, which is the complete opposite of Spree. In the Heights is a movie that pretty much anybody that pays attention to what's playing these days knows about. The new musical, the new musical adaptation of Lin-Manuel Miranda's first, I think it was his first musical on Broadway. He's the guy that, of course, is now known for Hamilton, but they went back and adapted his first play, and it was pretty good. I'll tell you a little bit about that one. That one's on HBO Max. So, In the Heights, Spree, and the Halloween Kills trailer. We're going to be talking about that on After Hours, and you can have access to that and all the other cool stuff, including a Patreon-exclusive episode about Ad Astra. Should be dropping sometime this month. You have access to all that if you go to patreon.com/Contrarian Prime and join the Contrarian supplements.
Shit's cheap, man. I make food analogies every week, but I'm running out of them to make because it's making me very self-conscious about how much fast food I eat that I'm able to just like quote these fast food menus page and verse. So I'm just going to start telling you that our Patreon's fucking cheap for $1. Scrounge up some change. Go over there. Throw it our way. Listen to our exclusive content. Tell us what to watch and what to discuss. I always predicate it with the more you pay, the more you get, the more deep coverage you'll get. And I also try to always give the disclaimer that's not a challenge. I always use like Cannibal Holocaust in a Serbian film as like, don't do that. Unfortunately, one of our patrons has brought something potentially even worse to us that I'm going to have to suffer through for your enjoyment. We love what we do. We know you love what we do. So come on and give back, and we will give back in return. Patreon.com/Contrarian Prime.
And I just remember, Alex, we, as of this month, I guess, we finally started doing our long time promised video reviews. So that's it. There's even more content now on our Patreon page. So yeah, like Alex said, patreon.com/Contrarian Prime. Join the Contrarian supplements. And now, Alex, take us into real talk.
All right. As I mentioned in the first portion, Contrarians Corner, Signs was released on August 2nd of 2002 with a fairly modest budget, considering what all on the table there was here, of $72 million, raked in the coin, bringing in a return of $410 million. M. Night Shyamalan's third movie, and we had talked about it in the first portion and on some of our other Shyamalan discussions, even to the point of waxing or waning poetic, depending on your prerogative, about M. Night Shyamalan in this moment in time. I don't know if we've had something like that since. Has there been a director that like people thought was going to be? Maybe that's the thing. Since Shyamalan, everyone's like tapered their expectations, or just
There are a couple of tellingly, I think, horror directors, because I know Ari Aster, he's on that track. I mean, he only has 2 movies so far, but you know, he's being hailed as the next big thing. Not by you or me.
I meant more in line of like actual huge mainstream directors. Because you know, on a smaller scale, people are, including myself, are all jazzed up on the Safdie brothers. For one fleeting moment in time, I thought Nicholas Winding Refn was the truth.
Oh my God.
But
you fool.
I was. My point being, it's one of those things that time potentially has already kind of eradicated, in the sense of these kids today will never really know what it was like when M. Night Shyamalan came on the scene. And after this movie, it was like taking the words out of your mouth in one of those reviews earlier. Hitchcock, Spielberg, we got a new one on our hands, boys. We got a new contender here. And quickly that was gone and never came back. But in this moment in time, Julio, and we're going to get to the reviews, the ones that didn't like it. When you saw this movie in the theater initially, coming out of it, what were your thoughts of it? And more importantly, what were your thoughts of where M. Night Shyamalan was going to take us?
I was all in going into Signs. I remember that because I loved Unbreakable. The Sixth Sense, I wasn't that crazy about. Like I thought it was. I've always said this about The Sixth Sense, and I mean I haven't seen it since. I've seen bits and pieces, right? And that's why I'm excited to revisit it in a couple episodes. But to me, my line about The Sixth Sense was just great twist, but without that twist, the movie's nothing. And I think that's extremely harsh.
We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, especially because I've grown to appreciate Toni Collette so much as an actress that I'm pretty sure that if nothing else, when I rewatch the movie in a couple of weeks, I'm going to enjoy her performance or appreciate her performance a lot more. So to me, it was like, it was building up from The Sixth Sense, which I thought was a good movie with a great twist, to Unbreakable, which I thought was a great movie with an okay twist, maybe. And then to Signs, which was an entertaining movie with a kind of a head scratcher of a twist. And I walked away thinking, that's fine. It's good. I mean, they can't all be unbreakable. Not all stories are going to be unbreakable and not all twists are going to be The Sixth Sense. But Signs was still like pretty solid. I remember liking it. Never watched it again since. And kind of like I referenced in Contrarians Corner when we were first getting started, I've run into people that love Signs the way I love Unbreakable. And I've run into people that are just like, oh yeah, Signs is just, it's there. It's not The Village, so it's not like part of bad Shyamalan, but it's not The Sixth Sense or Unbreakable. So to me, it was just one of those. It was like nobody talks about Signs in a way, like nobody has long conversations about Signs. If you really want to get into the Shyamalan of it, you talk about The Sixth Sense or Unbreakable or The Village or Last Airbender and so on. But Signs is kind of like, to me at least, my perception is always like it's there. It's not a bad Shyamalan movie. It's not one of his best, but it's still good. And that's kind of how I felt coming out of it the first time I watched it.
Interesting. I think this may be an interesting discussion that we're about to have. So before we get to it, 74% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it wasn't without its doubters or detractors. What were some of the negative comments on this film?
I'm going to start with Christopher Smith from Bangor Daily News, Maine, who simply says, crap circles.
Okay.
That's just setting the tone. Next, Joe Lozito from Big Picture, Big Sound says, Mr. Shyamalan is a gifted writer and filmmaker. He definitely has more great films in his future. However, he may need to take a step away from the paranormal thriller. I mean, I don't know that the genre was the problem, as we saw as his career developed. I think it's more of the writing. Daniel Etherington from film4.com says, Shyamalan continues his run of moody, skillfully constructed pictures, pity about plot weaknesses and the pretentious dialogue. And we have to talk about the Shyamalan dialogue. We kind of talked about it a little bit during our happening segment on the live stream for The Cure, but it happens again here. I mean, it happens in every movie. I think that it's just going to be a constant. It needs to be addressed again and again. Another short but sweet one. Jeet Thahil from Rediff.com says, Shyamalan should stop trying to please his mom.
What?
I don't know. I don't know what the history is behind that opinion. Is his mom really religious? Is that what's happening? I don't know. And finally, Ben Kennisberg from East Hampton Independent says, the religious statement is so out of keeping with the tone of the rest of the movie that it seems unintentional. I mean, that is definitely a talking point. The religious undertones, overtones, all sorts of tones in this movie, which, I mean, I'm not going to say that I didn't notice them the first time I watched it, because it's, I mean, how much more clear can you get when Mel Gibson is playing a priest or a preacher? Mm-hmm. I mean, they're literally, he talks to God several times during the movie. But still, I want to say that it's not that I felt it more on this rewatch, but more like I took it more seriously, or I realized that it was, I felt that Shyamalan wanted me to take it more seriously than I did the first time I watched the movie. What was your experience?
It's weird, like, Have you ever known someone that had like a crisis of faith?
I mean, shit, I had one. I mean, I don't know if it's a crisis of faith because that kind of implies that it was ongoing. I can relate to like the one moment where, his big Oscar clip, the first one we called out, which is, I used to believe and now I don't. But that's it, like and not to get like super like metaphysical and super religious or whatever. But to me, that the idea of, okay, well, if you're going to believe on a higher power that you owe good things to, then it kind of stands to reason that believing in that, then that means that you have to believe that that same higher power is allowing bad things to happen. And I was like, well, if that's the scenario, I'd rather just not believing anything, which is a little bit like what he does in this movie, right? Like, it's like, okay, well, if God allowed my wife to die such a horrible death, such a nonsensical death, then I'd rather not believe in God. So yeah, I mean, I got that. And I totally got that. What I didn't get the first time I watched the movie and I got this time was that this might be just I didn't realize that it could be such a personal look into M. Night Shyamalan's beliefs, like, is this what he really thinks? Is this how he thinks that the world works, that the universe works? Does he believe what the movie's telling you, that, everything happens for a reason, and that, well, even the most horrible things actually down the line can have a payoff that makes them worth it somehow? I don't subscribe to that line of thinking, but the idea that, I guess it's kind of bold, for him to go like, well, this is what I believe. I'm going to make a movie about aliens, but it's also about just how I think that the world works. Because it's either he did that or he made a movie that says that, but not because he believes it, just because he's like, well, and that's how I get to the twist at the end.
I'm having a hard time, like, as I did watching this movie's, I don't know if this movie's so much more thought-provoking and interesting than I remember, or if I'm just older and I care more about that stuff now. And also just not expecting it. We're on the other side of the Shyamalan experiment. And so there's a lot that you forget about in what he was capable of. And one of the first things I texted you about this was I could not believe he was capable of creating an atmosphere like he did in the first 20 minutes of this movie. Now, there's probably some people, there are some people that doesn't work for, and that's fine. But going from like The Happening and Last Airbender, where on top of being bad, they were just boring as sin. And then just like a movie where I even know what happens in the end, like the build in this, the atmosphere and the tension he's able to create. And it's a good looking movie. The way it's shot is good, as opposed to just like The Happening, where he just got obsessed with those like up the nose shots. Like, for example, the way that that shot is framed of Mel Gibson in the pharmacy, I don't know. I think that's awesome. And like a lot of the scenes I called out in the first portion, the Oscar clips are great. And
oh yeah,
it's but that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is this whole crisis of faith and identity that comes along with this movie, that I feel like any sensible person, that's always going to be something that looms in their mind of like, well, if there is a God, why does he allow X to happen? And why does it allow it to happen to me? And I think that's an interesting conundrum that the movie faces its viewer with, because, and you couldn't have done this if you didn't have an actor as good as Mel Gibson, but at least to me, you feel that struggle in this movie that he has, but it's coupled with this other insane shit that's going on. So it's like this blend of real, relatable struggles in life on different levels. I'm not saying everyone's gone through a crisis of faith, but there's just these issues of believing in anything. It doesn't have to be religious. So what he's going through, and on top of that, having to deal with the trauma of his wife's death, being a single parent. And then you add on to that this cataclysmic event that no one can relate to, this looming presence of life outside of Earth that we didn't know about coming in to potentially eradicate the human race. This is so much for this character to take on, and it would only work with someone who's as good of an actor as Mel Gibson is. Again, we're not defending this guy's personal habits and what he does in his real life. But like, I was so blown away by this because, again, it's been forever since I've seen it. And I think I care more now than I did when I was younger about movies and shit. And the whole monologue, and, you know, I'm kind of tripping over my words here because this is something that I can kind of relate to, because my adult life has been kind of a journey in faith and what I believe and learning about what I believe, but also how to be realistic about it and how to apply that to my real life. And I'm not practicing. I don't go to church or anything like that on a regular basis. I feel like I do have a certain set of beliefs, but then keeping that all in check and in balance with, like I said, realistic expectations of what that means. It doesn't mean it's going to stop everything. So when I do see and hear about people that are faced with situations like this and then lose their faith, that's completely relatable. Like, to me, the weirder thing is when people are like, you can't lose faith, man. You can't give up hope, that type of thing. So seeing as how there's not really that many, but the townspeople, the characters that surround him, are just kind of like almost in a way dismissive of his choice to not believe anymore. They're just like, no, you're still Father Graham or whatever. It adds this whole interesting wrinkle to it that there were certain points in this movie that I had to remind myself it's a movie about aliens. Like, I kept trying to think about what Mel Gibson's going through and, you know, my thoughts on that. And if I had met a character like Graham and he told me his story, what I would say to him in a conversation about belief and faith. And it's like, yeah, I'm not going to, you watched your wife die in front of your eyes and no one could do anything. I'm not going to tell you what to believe and what to do. But the interesting thing about this movie is that it comes back around with the whole idea of, you know, divine intervention, or however you want to word it, and kind of puts an interesting spin on that towards the end. Not to the point, one of the things I want to get across is I'm leaning heavily into this whole religion aspect of the movie. The movie itself at no point to me was heavy-handed or went overboard with any of the religious aspects. It was really, that's just my interpretation as a viewer. Is one of the aspects of the story I clung to was that, because I found it so fascinating. Do you think it goes overboard or leans too far into the religious aspect?
No, I mean, I don't think it's subtle about it, but I never felt that I was being preached to. I just felt that the conclusion that we arrived to was, that's where the movie and I clash. And it's not necessarily, not in a bad way. It was just more that, you know, the movie got to the end and the movie and I like locked eyes, and I just went, I disagree. And I walked away. but you know, that didn't affect my enjoyment of the movie. Like, I have problems with the movie, but they have nothing to do with the with its stance or what I read as its stance on, you know, religion or like its beliefs. Like, my main thought was, when I was over, it was just, okay, does M. Night Shyamalan believe in this, or was this just a convenient way to frame a story and the conflicts of, you know, and resolve the conflicts that he had put in front of his characters? And so that was, you know, in a way you could say, well, that doesn't matter. You know, the movie's a movie, and whatever Shyamalan believes, that shouldn't be a factor. And it isn't, but it is, just because, you know, I can't help but wonder, especially because, like I said, the first time I watched the movie, that didn't even occur to me. You know, when the movie was over, I think the first time I was just still trying to piece together how it all worked out. But as far as it being overtly religious, no, I don't think so. I think it's an alien movie. I mean, everything that you said, I agree 100%. But I'm curious to see if the movie lost you somewhat the way it lost me, which is like, maybe it's because I'd seen it before all the way. But I think that it gets, the more you learn about the situation, the harder it is to buy into it. And I know I didn't want to, like, especially on Contrarians Corner, I didn't want to like fall back on like the easy shots that everybody takes at signs, which is like, oh, well, if the aliens are allergic to water, why did they visit a planet that's like 3/4 water, right? And so on. And to me, that's kind of yes, but also it's besides the point, because you could justify it. You know, you could just say like, well, Earth was the only planet that they could get to. You know, we don't know what's going on in these aliens' lives. It's like, they're like, well, this is not ideal, but it's the best we can do. So we're going to Earth. the thing is, I felt that, especially because they call out War of the Worlds a couple of times in the movie. So I felt that this was a little bit of Shyamalan's take on War of the Worlds, where, it's like aliens attack, we're overpowered, it all seems hopeless. And then, oh, well, they get sick because they were not prepared for the bacteria that we are used to. And then they die. And to me, that story works because, it just makes sense. It's like, well, they wouldn't know about bacteria. It just seems like it just gives enough detail about that. The way that here he kind of starts trying to explain more of what's going on with the aliens, even though it's not a 100% explanation. It's a lot of the Culkin brother kind of theorizing and sharing what he sees in his book. On the surface, I like the idea that, they can't afford for the planet to be ruined by a massive war. So instead, they're going to go really low key and invade us without destroying the planet. But then once you take that like a step further and you think about it a little more, it's like, that is very silly. they're not gonna like, they're just going, like I said in Contrarians Corner, like door to door, kind of like engaging one-on-one and subduing people like one by one. That seems really weird. And, but that seems to be kind of like what the movie was saying. So as the movie progressed, that side of the story was kind of like losing me. But then on the other side though, as the movie progressed, the emotional moments were gripping. And so it didn't matter that it didn't matter that the alien invasion was looking pretty flimsy, because what really mattered was what was going on with Mel Gibson and with Joaquin Phoenix. It actually snuck up on me, man, because the first half of the movie, before he gets to the big centerpiece where he tells him we're alone, I was just like, okay, this is fun. It's, it's what I remembered, and it's about the aliens, and, and then it got to the moment where Mel Gibson actually acts and has like this big moment, and then he has a few more throughout the movie. And by the end, I was emotional, even though I was 100% aware that it was just, by then, by the time that you get to him holding Corey Culkin, they're outside and he thinks that he might be dead, and he starts talking to God again, and begging him to like not do this and whatever. And it is all surrounded with all the like bullshit with like the water and the alien and all that stuff, but the emotional part is just like this guy who's like been rejecting God, and suddenly he's like, I don't care, just save my kid. I'm like, I'm swallowing my pride. I don't care what happened with my wife. Can you please don't do this? And that whole thing, like, that got me emotional. And it was fascinating because, a big chunk of the movie was not quite working for me, but still the emotional undercurrent was. And that was great. And I don't even agree with Mel Gibson's beliefs. It's not that, I've been there. It was more, I was seeing somebody who had faith in something and then rejected it, was angry, and then kind of like embraced it again. I don't know. It was just fascinating. And it wasn't even something that was mirroring my life particularly closely.
Before I forget, I was one of the people when I was a youngster in college and disparaging of this movie, the whole, why would they come to Earth if it's 3/4 water? That was my fallback argument. And now my stance is, I've never encountered an alien. Who knows? And I mean, that's always the thing with the War of the Worlds. They got here and their immune system wasn't prepared for our air, is basically the truncated version of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what wiped them out. And here, maybe they had never encountered anything like water before, so they didn't know what it was. It could have been some cool like Jello, like something they could eat, and they just saw it and were like, hell yeah.
But see, my counter, and not that I agree that it doesn't matter, but my counter is that the movie actually explains that the crop circles are supposed to be markings. They're supposed to be guiding them away from water. Like, that's why at some point somebody theorizes, it looks like they're afraid of water because this map that they built with the crop circles stays away from water areas. But see, he doesn't need to do that. He didn't need to put that in. Like, I guess my main problem with it, as much of a problem as it could be, is just that I feel that the movie worked better whenever he didn't explain anything. And I think the movie would work better if he didn't explain anything. It's just like, we don't know why the crop circles are there. The idea of like these aliens come in and we never know what's happening, and then one day they leave. That's to me like super creepy, and I don't need to know anything, which is kind of what happens with War of the Worlds. As far as I remember, they show up, they destroy shit, they die. we never had a chance, but somehow we survived. And here, there are moments where it feels like that, especially when it's just Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix and two kids like in the basement, and it really, if you don't know how the movie ends, you're like, oh well, I guess this is it. Really, they're just they're going to die together, but there's no way that these 4 individuals or even planet Earth, based on everything we know, are going to triumph. They're not gonna overpower the aliens. That's creepier to me when you don't know anything. But instead, there's like enough rationalization of the aliens' actions that it kind of takes away a little bit of the magic for me.
Yes, I really didn't like the alien, the showdown with the alien and the family at the end. That is what took me out of it. If they just woken up and the aliens were gone, like cool. That is how I would have preferred the movie would have ended. And if it ended then, I think it would have fallen pretty much smack dab within the realms of the Mattis rule and been right about 90 minutes. But there are some aspects of this movie you had mentioned. It's I'm fine with them not explaining. You said something to the effect of, it doesn't need to be explained, or I'm fine with him not explaining it any further. Like the end where he's a priest again, one shot. It's all you need to tell that story. And I appreciate that they didn't good to have you back, Reverend, anything really heavy-handed like that. And
he goes to the pharmacy and it's like, oh, well, it'll be $10.99, Father. And he turns like, I said, don't call me. And then he smiles.
And then Waterloo by ABBA starts playing over the end credits. Waterloo. So there's that. A lot of the stuff with the kids is very subtle as far as their relationship with their father that doesn't need explaining. Like the dinner scene. Let's just go ahead and talk about the dinner scene there. That's possibly, from an acting perspective, the best scene in the whole movie, as far as a collective effort, as everyone involved. And I mean, Abigail Breslin, as we know, is a fine actress now, and so it shouldn't be surprising that she was fairly solid and beyond her years when she was 5 years old. But you get the impression that this tension and resentment of the kids between Bo and Morgan have just been building towards their dad. But it's not like, I say this all the time, movies have just, the level of respect for the viewer's intelligence a lot of modern films that I have seen is so low. And with this, and again, we're talking about M. Night Shyamalan, who eventually just became lowest common denominator type thing. And with this, it's just like, he's just dropping you in the middle of this family that has been going through these issues and these struggles with the loss and, trauma of losing their mother, and the man losing losing his wife. And then the scene is like the culmination of that. But at no point in the movie does it beat you over the head with any of this. So for someone like myself watching this, it makes this scene so much more impactful because you feel like you understand it, even though you haven't seen all of the dynamics and, what led to this head, so to speak. And the whole idea behind the scene is awesome. Just not awesome, but it's very just well written. The whole idea of this, Mel Gibson realizes, well, this might really be it. So we all should, he poses it to his kids and his brother. It's basically signing them up for their last meal, but he does it in this nurturing fatherly way to make it seem like a fun thing. And that whole shot of him, his profile as he's explaining to them, whatever you want to eat. And he's explaining, I'm going to have a cheeseburger with bacon, extra bacon. And he starts smiling. It's so good. I think I'm with you most of the way. I think I enjoyed it more than you did on the whole, but exactly what you're saying is true. There were parts of it that took me out, but these scenes that I was able to connect with, I don't know about you, but when I was dialed in, this movie, when it hits, it fucking hits.
I agree. That's why I said it snuck up on me. I wasn't even aware that I was dialed in a way. You know what I mean? I was kind of half rolling my eyes at what was happening during the end, in a playful way. I wasn't just disgusted by the movie. And then, like I said, I got emotional because it was, this father really, it wasn't just that, because I knew that the kid was going to survive, but it was just I guess I'd forgotten the arc of the relationship between Gibson and God, and just that push and pull that goes throughout the movie, and to have that final turn be about him just, just saying, okay, whatever, just save him. I could do without the line of oh, somebody saved you. Like, I didn't need that. But I think that when people if people accuse it of being just like going overboard, they might be pointing at that moment. But I mean, it's fine. Like the rest of it was good. Let's talk about Joaquin Phoenix for a second, because I was going to say, speaking of taking you out of the movie, let's talk about M. Night Shyamalan's on-screen persona. But I want to do Joaquin first, because
Before we get to Joaquin real quick, this is going to be real quick because we just talked about Abigail Breslin, and honestly, there's not too much to talk about. She's very good where she's at. That line we mentioned in the first portion, the one that's from the trailer, there's a monster outside my room. Can I have a glass of water? Do you think that was intentionally written as a run-on sentence, or do you think that was just the best take they got of her doing that? I've always thought that it was like intentionally distressing in the sense that it was meant to be this long run-on sentence.
I don't know, because because here's the thing. Like, back in 2002, I would have said it's intentional, because I believe that M. Night Shyamalan could do no wrong, or could do very little wrong, or there's no, and he was, to me, in my mind, he was like a really good director. But then, having seen what happens later, I mean, I just don't know anymore. I think, kind of touching a little bit on the thing about dialogue, I think he has a very specific writing style, and a very specific way of directing actors. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't work. I think it depends on the actor. A lot of it depends on the actor. I think that Bruce Willis, for the most part, somebody like Bruce Willis, for example, he works. Like, the dialogue works. The M. Night Shyamalan cadence, the structure of the dialogue, and the way that Shyamalan directs him works. Same thing with Mel Gibson here, and actually, and especially Joaquin Phoenix. Like, I think that they managed to really make it their own. I don't know what it is with, she was so young, Abigail Breslin. What kind of technique do you have at 5? So in a way, right, that means that you have to put it on Shyamalan. I don't know how many takes he did. I don't know what direction he gave her, but what you got there was probably a lot about, had to do with him, coupled with like her natural talent or whatever. But then, the question is like, why doesn't he do that all the time?
Yeah.
If he's capable of crafting that moment of dialogue, with a kid, then why did he allow the happening to happen? Like the performances, the happening, or the performances in Last Airbender, which, had like 3 kids kind of really struggling with the way he had written the screenplay. So I don't know. I really don't know. I agree with you that it works. It's great. But I don't know if it was a happy accident, or if it was just like, this is how you say it.
Yeah. It's certainly fascinating when you think of the machinations and his style of filmmaking.
Well, but while we're in the dialogue, though, and this kind of will bridge it to Joaquin Phoenix, but also kind of touching on the Culkin brother, because I think that you can tell the different levels of, acting prowess. And of course, Culkin was like, I don't know how old he was, but he was a teenager. It's not that I want to compare what he's doing with his lines, versus what Gibson is doing or Joaquin Phoenix is doing. But to me, out of those 4, out of the main 4 characters, I felt that the one actor that was somewhat struggling with the way that Shyamalan writes his dialogue was Corey Culkin. And not to where it ruined the movie for me, but there was when Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix speak their lines, like, they sound like people. And when Abigail Breslin speaks her lines, she sounds like a little girl, like a very charismatic little girl. So she can get away with not sounding like an adult, because she's not. But then Corey Culkin doesn't sound like a regular kid. He sounds like he's reading a script, not in a bad way again, but he doesn't sound naturalistic the way that the others do. And so I think that a lot of it's in the writing. I think that just the way that M. Night Shyamalan constructs his sentences and the way that he delivers information, it can be really clunky if you have an actor that has trouble making the dialogue his own or her own. With Corey Culkin, I think it was just kind of like straddling that line. Again, it never came close to ruining the movie for me, but it was like noticeable. It's just one of the things. I don't think that dialogue is M. Night Shyamalan's strength. Certain actors can just basically take it and do wonders with it, and that's how you get like really cool lines. But
happy accidents then, in that I absolutely loved they have a problem with pantry doors line.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's one of the lines you called out in Contrarians Corner about the almost comedy, but I love that so much of that scene because he's asking those questions in like a hypothetical nature to his son about, if they did come, what would it be like? And then when he sits down and says that, and then they all realize that he's encountered one of them, and then it fades to black. Like that might be my favorite singular moment in the movie. I think that's great. So do you think that's by design? You think he just had Mel Gibson deliver it really well? Because I'm in agreement with you, and especially with what we've done so far in M. Night and the movies he's written. Tarantino, he is not. So do you think in a movie like this, in situations where the dialogue does really work, do you think that's more of a compliment on its cast?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, not to take away from, like, that's a good line, right? And like, if we're going to assume that was not Gibson improvising and that was like a line that wasn't the script, that is a good line. And, the way it's set up and everything, that's good. But where I have trouble is with the chunks of exposition that he has in his movies, from time to time. And Corey Culkin has a lot of them in this movie because he's explaining what the book says. so I think that's where he trips up. I think that Shyamalan is pretty good at, I guess, maybe trailer moment dialogues, like fucking I see dead people. And, I'm sure that you can find those moments throughout his movies. But I don't think that he writes dialogue the way people talk, but I also don't think that he writes dialogue in a style that seems kind of graceful. Aaron Sorkin, like, is always like my favorite example. Like Aaron Sorkin or even Tarantino, right? They don't write dialogue the way people talk, but they write dialogue the way that you kind of wish people talked. And so it's very easy to buy it. Like Shyamalan doesn't do that. Shyamalan's dialogue is just kind of like weird. It's just, and you don't notice if you have a really good actor saying it because they kind of, they just do that thing that actors do where they make it their own. And now it sounds like, well, maybe I don't talk that way and my friends don't talk that way, but I believe that Mel Gibson talks that way in this movie, or Joaquin Phoenix, they'll say that. But when you have a kid doing it or an actor that's not comfortable, then it stands out.
So Joaquin Phoenix, what do you want to throw on the table about him?
I think he's great. News. Great
of course
news.
He is.
Breaking news. I know, but I've forgotten how great he was. To me, Joaquin Phoenix in this movie, from like my first time watching it, like he was an afterthought. He was the meme, and he was just like, before he was a major superstar, or as much of a superstar as he is right now. But I was just so like glued to his character. Like I really liked what he was doing, and how there's that moment when they're in the basement and Culkin is having this attack. He's having an asthma attack, and they don't have the medicine. So Mel Gibson has to talk him through it. And half the scene, the camera is on Joaquin Phoenix, who's just watching his brother deal with this emergency, and he is unable to do anything. All he could do is just sit there next to Abigail Breslin and watch it happen. That's good enough. But then the scene pays off because later on he talks to Mel Gibson and he tells him, like, I watched you lose your faith and I don't ever want to see that again. And just the way he delivers it, like it's a combination of me loving the character and just loving the way that Joaquin Phoenix plays him.
Anyone that's listened to this podcast at least one or two episodes know you're dealing with two huge Joaquin Phoenix fans, so shouldn't be surprising that we find him to be one of the more redeeming parts of the movie. Yeah, and the meme scene is amazing. It still is awesome the way it plays out. And like I forgot, because like when I see it in just its own, when I see it naked like that, I sometimes think he's kind of hamming it up. But then I remember in the context of the movie, he hasn't like slept in 2 days, and like he's just kind of completely obsessed with everything that's going on. So it really works out very well. Mel Gibson, we talked about facetiously and seriously in the first portion. Mel Gibson is an incredibly talented actor, and obviously due to some of the choices he made in his personal life, this movie could be regarded as his final leading role in the sense of being a bona fide movie star, and or like a superstar. We use those examples like Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks, that type of thing. At one point in time, he was in that class, that ilk. He makes so much shit in this movie that could potentially unravel work just based on his ability as an actor. Like I mentioned, the dinner scene is great. Him trying to maintain his composure when faced with the guy who killed his wife is also great. And just the emotions he goes through, and you being able to understand what he's going through in almost every scene. It's really good. So much better than I remembered it being, from a perspective of his singular performance. No need for the dogs to die. No need at all.
Like we said in Contrarians Corner, it's a cheap emotional button to push.
Yeah. And yeah, that scene where he is talking to the alien inside the pantry, like I've told you, that is just... If someone told you and they were clearly terrified and they were about to like leave their property in an effort to save their life, and you could see this in a genuine sense on their face, and they told you there's an alien in my home, do you think you could resist the curiosity and temptation to go see it?
I would like to think that if I had a family to get back to, I would, because I'm responsible for other lives besides my own. If it was just me, I would go take a peek, because potentially once in a lifetime opportunity. For all I know, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow because the aliens will have bombed the Earth or whatever. So,
yeah. I had come into this thinking that the dinner scene was my favorite, but hearing you talk about it and then letting it like kind of ruminate, that scene in front of the TV is so good. From the way it's shot to the kids are asleep and it's like the adults talking, but it's also both their first time to kind of bear their worry about it since the kids are asleep. And it's M. Night, man. And obviously our retrospective discussion will come at the conclusion with The Sixth Sense, but coming off of The Happening and then The Last Airbender into this, it does not seem right that the same person could have made all three of those movies. And more in the sense of just, this is so good and offers so much, whereas the other two are just like, they feel like someone who had never made a movie before was just given carte blanche.
Yep. I'm sure there's behind the scenes backstory that kind of shaped the narrative in a way, but still, it's the same person. It doesn't feel like it. But speaking of that same person, I do want to talk about him taking a substantial role in front of the camera for the first time in his career. Like, as we know it, I guess, like I said, I don't remember him in The Sixth Sense. I'm sure he's there somewhere. And he has a very tiny part in Unbreakable. But then this was the first time that, he was there. He had dialogue. He was a key player in the story. And from here, The Village is more of a small part. And then Late in the Water, he's like a full-fleshed character. How do you feel about it? Because I feel bad about reacting negatively to it, but I do. Like, I watch it, I'm like, what the hell is he doing? That's M. Night Shyamalan. Why is he in front of the camera? To be fair, I feel the same way when I see Tarantino in one of his movies. Even in Pulp Fiction, like Jimmy always kind of like feels like, why didn't you just get an actor?
Yeah, I agree 100%. When the discussion of Pulp Fiction comes up, and to me, obviously, our episode many moons ago, I talked about how it's one of my favorite movies ever, and I still think it's just an absolute masterpiece. When I am posed with the discussion of what's not good about it, the first thing that comes to mind is Tarantino in it. Because he's a charming and charismatic guy, just like in his interviews and press scrums. I don't need him saying the N-word and like talking about coffee in a movie that's already flawless. I don't need him to be the flaw in a flawless movie.
Right.
I mean, when we're talking about Tom Hanks and That Thing You Do, well, Tom Hanks is an amazing actor.
Mm-hmm.
With this, it's funny. My emotion has always been, well, fuck him for putting himself in a movie, in his own movie. And then I always thought like he sucked, because I still will never get the bad taste of Lady in the Water out of my mouth.
Yep.
And so going back and rewatching this, he's not bad. The scene with him and Mel Gibson is very good,
Mm-hmm.
but like I can't help but just feel fuck you with the whole shot of him downtown where they're like, who is he? Who is that guy? It's just like, come on. So when that was still fresh in my mind, the scene that they have that by itself is perfectly fine and very serviceable for the purposes of the movie. I'm in the same boat as you. I was just like, man, just get someone different. It was 2002. Get Breckenmeyer in there and just Sean William Scott, just someone to, kind of pop the crowd and pass the time. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you. While the actual delivery of his dialogue is not bad, and I do like the scene with him and Mel Gibson, his introduction is just very silly, and exactly what you said. I'm left just thinking, I don't want you in this movie.
It's weird, and I know that it wouldn't bother me if I didn't know that was him. I would probably think it was cool if you told me that because I mentioned him in Contrarians Corner. If you told me that Terrence Malick plays one of the soldiers in the Thin Red Line and has like, I don't know, 10 lines throughout the movie, I'll be like, that's a nice piece of trivia. But when you tell me, oh, M. Night Shyamalan is it's in that scene with Mel Gibson, I'm like, fuck him. Give it to Mark Wahlberg. So,
any closing thoughts?
Well, I was about to ask you your score. My closing thoughts are that I walk away from this movie holding it in higher regard than I did before. My experience watching it has been more intense, even though I've been able to spot more flaws in it, like more things that bother me. When it worked so well that I walk away from it thinking that was a good movie experience. It's still no Unbreakable.
Well,
but but it's really good. It's better than good. Like I think it's kind of, I'm giving it 4 stars. I think before I would have given it maybe 3.5, but I'm sitting at 4 now.
yeah, I think in the end here we're closer to what I had hoped we would be than initially. I think your tone kind of threw me for a loop there in the beginning about your thoughts on it. I think a lot of it is growing up, maturing, expanding my mind, learning about things outside my circle and learning about different people and how life is different for everybody. And that had definitely helped me appreciate it in a way that I certainly did not before. And on top of that, the acting I came away appreciating at a higher level, and the storytelling I came away appreciating at a higher level. Unfortunately, I think part of that is because I've lived through the bottom of the barrel with M. Night Shyamalan and seen like the worst he can offer, and then be like, watch this and be like, oh man, holy shit, he knew what he was doing at one point in time. So I remember always having a certain level of about it, and now it's a very positive thing. There are some things about it that take me out of it. Unfortunately, the CGI has not aged too well. Fortunately, there's no real reliance on it until the last scene of the movie. So that's kind of the good news, bad news of it. Even like the shot of the alien in, is it Brazil, where the home video is supposed to be from?
Yeah, it's Brazil.
That looks fine because it's on like a a handheld camera and it's all grainy and shit. So that looks cool. But then the actual face-to-face it's kind of like, oh, Mel Gibson's yelling at a tennis ball type thing. It's somehow what I remembered, but also way better than. So for that, I'm going to give it a B+. I think there's definitely room for improvement on some of the things in the movie and obviously some of the things that took me out of it. But man, we said this a few times in real talk here. When this movie's firing, it's firing on all cylinders. And like we use the phrase dialed in. When I was into this movie, I was in. Like there would be portions where I just completely put my notebook down and was just kind of immersed in what was going on. This could upset the balance come the end of this all, because I always thought Sixth Sense was like the queen bee, excuse me, in the Shyamalan universe, and we may have a new king. The king is dead. Long live the king. Mel Gibson's here. Great movie. B+, 4 stars. If by some bit of fate you haven't yet seen Signs, check it out.
Or if you watched it a long time ago and it was just kind of okay, might want to revisit it 20 years later.
I cannot concur with that assessment enough. That is exactly right. What I can say, though, is I hope and wished to have stayed away from what is on deck, the aforementioned After Earth for episode 137. Before we get there, though, we actually have a bonus episode on our Path of the Contrary, the 2018 Netflix original Extinction, directed by Ben Young, and starring Michael Pena and Lizzie Kaplan.
Sold.
Julio, who the hell is bringing this to us?
This is a patron demand. See, this is what happens when you join the cult at the Contrarian Supplements.
Cult of Contrary.
Yes. If you get on the right tier, you can tell us what to watch. In this case, Dan is demanding we watch Extinction, which it's a rotten movie. I don't know anything about it, Alex, other than it stars Michael Pena and Lizzie Kaplan, and one other bit of trivia that I'm going to save for the actual recording. I'm going to leave you in the dark about that, but all right, looking forward to it. It's a Netflix original. I mean, we have a complicated history with those. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not.
I'm curious to see what it's going to bring. That is absolutely for sure. Something new. So, I guess I would consider it a blind area. Is it a blind area if you don't know it exists? I guess that That's the question. But Extinction is what is up next. We will get back to the Shyamalanthology after that with episode 137 and After Earth. So I get to delay the inevitable a little bit longer.
Now you can take us to Perennial plugs.
All right, and we start off with the Festive Years, who provide our opening and closing tracks. They kick us off with Last Stand and take us home with Summer of 99. Be sure to head over to thefestiveyears.com for any and all Festive Years needs.
Our friend and fellow podcaster Hans Rothgieser was the man behind our logo and all the graphics that you see on our Patreon page, on our webpage, and our upcoming merch. You can check out Hans's work on his website, mildemonios.pe. That's MILDEMONIOS. You can contact him on Twitter at mildemonios or email him mildemonios@hotmail.com. You can ask him to draw you a logo, to draw you some comics, or you can check his multiple works. He's a novelist. He has a whole bunch of zombie novels, including his latest zombie short story anthology called Somos Zombies, where every short story is set in a different area of Peru, and each short story is written by an author that lives in that area. So that's its gimmick. And then, of course, he's a podcaster. He has his podcast Nación Combi and Marginal about Peruvian current affairs and about economy. Hans, thank you for all your support.
And lastly, as always, we give thanks to Miss Zoe Perez, who helps out with our social media game. If you haven't already, be sure to head over to facebook.com/contrarianprime. We have some exclusive videos there. Those are exclusive to our Facebook page, so be sure to check those out. And of course, on Instagram, we are at Contrarian Prime. Zoe makes some really cool little videos, audio clips, interactive graphics, and all the stuff that Julio and I could never figure out how to do. So, Zoe, we appreciate all the work you do for us. Keep up the good work. And with all of our regular pleasantries out of the way, that is going to do it for this episode of The Contrarians, where we're right and you're wrong, and we will catch you next time.